There was one question from last night. I don't know if... I don't know if the person, since I see that numbers have thinned out quite a bit, I don't know if the person who asked the question is still here. It was about this phrase that we see in the Visuddhimagga, that states have no curiosity. I had to look that up last night to see exactly where it occurs. I actually don't really like that translation very much. The Pali expression near ihaka, I would set the sense is that phenomena have no autonomy, you might say, power of independent action, that they always occur through conditions, in conjunction with conditions. So they're not let's say, dhammas, when things are looked at from the standpoint of dhammas, they're not self-initiating sources of action, but things always have to act in concert with other things in order to accomplish anything. Okay, so now we can consider, questions, as I said, questions that arose from anything out of the retreat. Okay, Regina. And each time you take the mobile microphone. Yeah, you have to. Yeah. It's not on.
Better? Yes.
Yeah, now it's on.
Okay, so I think it was the first day of the retreat, you had said that that concentration meditation, or the ability to have concentration meditation, was based on sila and right view. And I understand how to develop sila. I get that. And it's laid out really nicely.
Yeah.
In terms of right view, I have a problem because for me, it's really hard, like when I think of people like Stalin or Mao, sometimes I think they're in the same place as like Mother Teresa or Florence Nightingale. Like I think it's the Apanaka Sutta talks about how our actions have results.
Yeah.
But I don't know how to make myself believe that, because sometimes I feel like when we die, that's it. And I don't know how to think any other way, and that's not right view, but I don't know what to do.
Wait, go over when you said about Stalin and
people who do like the famous mass killers in our world, like Stalin and Mao, and I feel as though they're in the same destination as, say, Mother Teresa.
Oh, you mean that they all?
Basically in the ground.
Yeah.
And I don't know how not to think that way.
Yeah.
And then I'm worried, well, then I'm not going to be able to go very far in this practice because I don't have right view. But then, Dina's example notwithstanding, I don't know how to cultivate that.
Yeah, I was looking for Edmund. He's not here now, but he mentioned to me a philosopher. Okay, let me put it this way, rather than go take that route. Okay, there's no logical way to prove the reality of rebirth, so far as I could see. And the argument that I gave, I wouldn't call it an argument, but the reflection that I gave, to my mind, strongly supports the idea that there is some continuation beyond death, in which we reap the results of our action. And if we do reap the results of our action, the only way that makes sense is through a succession of existences, through rebirth, rather than eternal afterlife, permanent heaven, permanent hell. Because we each perform a wide variety of deeds. In most cases, it's a mixture of good and bad. And so it just seems it would be utterly unfair that on this basis we get assigned forever up there or forever down there. And even if we do some terribly bad deed, it just seems to myself a requirement of moral justice that after we undergo the retribution for that deed, through suffering, say, in a lower realm of existence, that karmic force should exhaust itself and we take rebirth elsewhere. Okay, so that's reflection that leads me to accept the idea of rebirth. Though I accept it even from the early time when I encountered Buddhism, after a little resisting the idea of existence beyond death. Once I saw that it's clearly coming out of the discourses of the Buddha, I accepted it. But I found some empirical evidence for rebirth, and this is the cases of children who are who say that they remember their previous life, and they've been able to give some identifying markers about who their previous identity was. And these cases have been investigated. There was a scientist at the University of Virginia, Professor Ian Stevenson, in the 1960s, 70s, who investigated many of these rebirth cases and wrote several books. Maybe the entry-level book is called 20 Cases Suggestive of Reincarnation. And then he did more specialized studies. One of them dealt with individuals who had birthmarks and they had a recollection of their previous life. And so, for example, there was a case of a man who was born with some kind of scars, even from the time of birth, scars on the legs. And he had a memory of, in his previous life, he had been bound up like by murderers with ropes, and he died in captivity in that way. And so the scar marks, he remembers that the ropes were pressing against his flesh, and then he died in captivity. So that's just one example. And Professor Stevenson, like he was professor of medicine at the University of Virginia School of Medicine. So it's not like a crank, who just has a case to make, the secrets of the occult, strange stories of reincarnation. But he approached this as a rigorous scientist, and he investigated numbers of cases in Sri Lanka, India, perhaps Burma, and in some countries where reincarnation is not an accepted belief, like I think in Turkey, Egypt. And the conclusion that he comes to, he doesn't jump and say, this proves reincarnation is absolutely true. But he tries to consider other ways to explain these phenomena. And he says, well, it could be that this person X learned about the identity of the other person by hearing others speak about him. But how could he get so much detail? So after considering these other hypotheses, what he concludes is that, well, one might be able to offer other explanations, but the explanation which is simplest and clearest is that in this case, that individual who's alive, that child who's alive now, is in fact the reincarnation of the person that he or she says he was previously.
Thank you very much.
And then there is also the phenomena of children, infants who have some extraordinary abilities, like maybe Mozart, who composing sonatas, compositions at the age of 5. There's somebody mentioned by Venerable Narada in that big book called The Buddha and His Teaching, who was a kid who learned at the age of 7 or something like that. He was able to speak about 12 languages. And at the age of 14, he was writing books of biblical analysis. And so there are cases like that which are quite difficult to explain without presupposing some previous existence. So Stalin, you get what you deserve. And Mother Teresa, who was declared a saint, was it yesterday?
Thank you, Bhante. I'm Giovanna.
Excuse me?
I'm Giovanna, first of all.
Yeah, I know.
And I have a question actually connected to Rebirth. So prior to this retreat, my attitude towards Rebirth was, I guess, not to think about it too much. And now it seems to me that the path doesn't really make any sense without Rebirth.
Exactly, yeah.
So isn't then Rebirth a sort of dogma in Buddhism? That's the one thing that I was like, so if I remove Rebirth, the whole path doesn't make any sense.
Yeah,
but then because you can't prove it, isn't it a dogma?
Okay, that's a good question. Isn't Rebirth a dogma? You come from a Catholic background? Well, of course, because I know you're from Italy, so I think a dogma, what is the technical definition of a dogma? Anybody who's...
Like, for instance, the Trinity is a dogma in Catholicism.
Yeah.
So you don't question it. Like, basically, that's the way it is, and then everything else comes from that absolute truth.
So it's an article belief that one has to accept, and if one doesn't accept it, then you're like excommunicated.
It's more that then...
or you just don't...
you have to believe in God. Like, there are certain things that you cannot prove, so that's how the whole system works from it. So, like the Holy Trinity, you believe that Jesus Christ was born and he did X, Y, and Z, that he's the Son of God, that...
okay.
etc. It's an article of faith.
Okay.
Yeah, so, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, okay. We have the omniscient mind, so... Wait, when you do that, take the microphone so the voice will carry.
Say, a principle or set of principles laid down by an authority as inconvertibly true. And it gives an example, the Christian dogma of the Trinity.
Okay, I'll be standing. Okay, a principle or set of principles laid down by an authority is incontrovertibly true. Okay, what I would say is that, the Buddha doesn't teach rebirth as this is a principle that you must accept, but because he has the full knowledge of enlightenment, so this is what he has understood, what he has realized for himself, the nature of the world. So that's what's always said, that he's directly known and realized for himself the nature of this world and the world beyond, and he proclaims it to others. So the Buddha, through his enlightenment, has seen the nature of this world, the world beyond, the laws, the workings of karma that operate between them. And he teaches them not as a doctrine that has to be believed, but this is just the nature of things. And then also this knowledge is said not to be exclusive to the Buddha himself, but he says that those who develop, the prerequisites are able to see that and verify it for themselves, at least, to some extent, maybe not in all details. To do that, one is supposed to develop and master the fourth jhana, and then the Visuddhimagga actually gives very precise instructions for how to develop the recollection of one's previous lives based on the fourth jhana. Then one sends one's capacity for recollection back, starting with what one did before one went to sit in meditation, then what happened yesterday, last month, and so on, till the memory gets speeded up, till one comes back to the time in the womb. Then one meets, it said that one meets, runs up like against a wall that one can't pierce through. But one has to keep on then going back into the jhana, coming out, and then directing one's mind to break through that wall. And then at a certain point, when the power of concentration is strong enough, that wall of forgetfulness collapses, and then the recollection of the past life comes. Oh, was that? Yeah, okay.
Can I just follow up with that? Thank you. If you had to play devil's advocate, if you had to play devil's advocate, would there be, could you make any sense of pursuing the path with, if rebirth weren't there? Because I remember like 3 days ago I had, it seemed to me very clear that I didn't have to bother with rebirth, but I don't remember anymore because something changed in my head, and I'm like, okay, it doesn't make any sense. Why would I why would I pursue the path if rebirth weren't there? So I'm like,
no. What I would say is that the practice of Dhamma has benefits, directly visible benefits. So it's beneficial right here and now, beneficial to oneself, beneficial to others, so it makes one a better person, and it helps one to develop by observing the precepts. One is observing ethical standards of ethical behavior. By developing the mind, one is able to become more peaceful, more equanimous, kinder, more compassionate, and happier. It brings a kind of peace and happiness. So it definitely, the practice of the Dharma has directly visible benefits that can be verified, experienced here and now. So I wouldn't say that it only makes sense against the background of rebirth, but if you want to take like the whole development of the path through all of its stages, up to the level of the paths and fruits and the different levels of attainment, that only makes sense against the background of rebirth. Yeah. Okay, Sally and Maria? And then I see a hand in the back, but I just see the silhouette. We'll get you, but you have to wait your turn.
May I just get answer of I asked this morning?
Oh, ask the question again.
Okay. My question is the difference of the Nibbana, Buddha's Nibbana, and the Arahant's Nibbana.
The passing away. You mean
passing
the Nibbana as they're passing away, not the enlightenment, but the passing away.
If you have time, you can illustrate the enlightenment too, but now the main question is about Nibbana of Buddha, because when I think of like nowadays we homage to Buddha. Buddha is the knower of the world, and we feel that he's still with us. And but for our arhatship, it's non-existence. It just don't make sense to me. So.
Yeah, I remember somebody used the simile that in the Mahayana system, when you're calling on the Buddha, it's like you're placing a telephone call and there's an answer on the other side. Whereas in the Theravada system, when you're calling on the Buddha, it's like you're placing the telephone call and then the operator's voice says, "I'm sorry, but that number is no longer in that number is no longer in service."
Looks like we all like the first one, right?
Okay, this is the way I understand it. Sort of my way of trying to make sense of this in the case, both the Buddhas, the arhats, when they pass away, both pass into final nibbana. It's not the case that the arhat completely disappears, but the Buddha remains somewhere up there, invisible, looking down on us. And when we appeal to him, he's there to help us. But this is my understanding, though, in the case of both the Buddhas and the arhats, though nothing remains of their individual identity, their compound of the five aggregates, for both the succession of the five aggregates has ceased. But through their countless lives of accumulating merits and what I call the blessing powers through the practice of the paramitas, when they pass, even though they pass away, but that spiritual power of their accumulation of merits and paramitas and wisdom sort of remains sort of suffusing the world, suffusing the universe. So when we direct our minds, say, a recollection of the Buddha, it's not like the Buddha is there, picking up on us and thinking, there's my Bhante sitting in his little altar thinking of me, so I'm going to send some blessings down on him. But it's that the mind is sort of tuning into that blessing power that's been spread out by the Buddha, that's extending down through the ages. And so one is able to pick up on that blessing power. Maybe compare this, to use a little analogy, it's like taking a boulder and then throwing it into a pond. Now the boulder sinks to the bottom of the pond. The boulder doesn't remain on the surface. But when the boulder hits the pond, it sends out waves. First big waves come rolling along, then smaller waves, and then little ripples. And those waves and ripples, they have an effect. And so the Buddha passes away, but he sends out the waves of his blessing powers, which continue down, it's a kind of spiritual current down the ages. And when the great arahats pass away also, they send out their blessing power in passing away. So that's why when we do this recitation, we say, Bhavatu sabba mangalang rakantu sabba devata sabba buddhanubhavena sabba dhammanubhavena sabba sanghanubhavena. That is that Buddha, it's Buddha and anubhava. Anubhava is what I translate as spiritual power or spiritual might. And so when we turn our mind towards the Buddha, towards the Dhamma, towards the noble Sangha, then we sort of pick up on those waves of blessings that are coming down, and they benefit us. That's my understanding.
May I ask, so it's more like that, so Buddha, or Bodhisattva's blessing is very, very, very large. So, while arhatship maybe is different from that kind of large compassion. So, but the nibbana is the same.
Yeah. But even the arhats have though it's not their compassion is not as great and powerful as the Buddha, but they also have the compassion which extends out in the form of this, what I call this blessing power. So maybe the Buddha is like the big boulder that's thrown into the pond, whereas the arhat is like smaller rocks that are thrown into the pond.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, I said. And then, Maria?
Yeah, my question is, at what stage, or is there a stage where a meditator reaches where he or she can no longer
Put the microphone to your...
Yeah, my question is there a stage that a meditator reaches that he can no longer, or she, get off the path voluntarily?
I'm not...
Is there a stage?
Yeah, you have to keep the microphone close.
Is there a stage where one reaches, where one can no longer voluntarily remove themselves from the path.
Where one can. Okay, that stage would probably be when one enters upon what is called the insight leading to emergence. So when one is in the knowledge of equanimity about formations, then if one's determination is not to gain liberation in that life, then one will not go beyond equanimity about formations. For example, I gave the example of yesterday, somebody has the bodhisattva vow. So in order to fulfill the bodhisattva vow, they have to continue over many, many lives, developing paramitas and accumulating what they call the requisites of merits and wisdom. And so if one enters upon the path and reaches arhatship, then one can't fulfill the rest of the bodhisattva path. So the one who aspires to follow the bodhisattva path can build up insight to equanimity about formations, and then through the power of the vow will remain there. And also others who want to reach maybe not Buddhahood, but to follow maybe what we call a little bodhisattva path that is working for the benefit of others, working to promote the Dhamma, so they could still develop insight to equanimity about formations, but because they don't have the aspiration, the wish to achieve realization in that life, then they won't go into the insight leading to emergence. And then there was, right, okay.
Hello, Bhante. Per my understanding, am I audible? Yeah. Per my understanding, I am the responsible for my all wholesome and unwholesome karmas, and I am going to get vipak of it. I have to face it till I reach to Nibbana. Is that correct?
Oh yeah.
In that case, I am a little bit confused about metta, that when I generate it for myself or the others, when they consider me for the metta, how is it going to help me in reaching to Nibbana or on the path of insight and meditation? So there the confusion is.
Okay, say it again. I didn't quite get it.
If I'm bound to face the vipak of my karmas, then where the metta helps me? The metta which I generate for myself and the other people who consider me when they are generating the metta. How does it help?
Okay. Okay, the metta in itself is, it's beneficial in several respects. First, it's directly beneficial to the mind, quite apart from its ability to lead to jhana, but even the preparatory stages of loving kindness meditation, or even doing it in a fairly routine fashion, just using the formulas, one is still generating wholesome thoughts, which is creating wholesome karma, virtuous karma. And then by developing the metta, it's transforming one's character, even little by little, so that one is motivated to be more helpful and considerate of others, more beneficial, to behave in ways that are more beneficial to others. So in that way, you're both benefiting others, and by doing so, then you are accumulating wholesome karma for yourself. And then if one develops metta to the level of deep concentration, or even to the level of the jhanas, then one can use the metta as a foundation of samadhi for developing insight. And so then the metta then becomes a basis for insight. Did that answer the question? Okay, Larry, that's your name, Larry, and after that, Doug.
Yes, hello, Bhante. I have a question about nimitta. is there an equivalent of nimitta while you're doing Vipassana meditation? And just a little bit of a follow-up question on that is when you're doing, when you think you see nimitta, it's very easy to be mistaken about it.
Yeah, no.
This could be a delusion or hallucination,
exactly,
or just something random happen, you just correlate with it. So is there a way of dealing with that? So.
Okay, the first question, whether there's a counterpart to the nimitta in Vipassana meditation. If it's proper Vipassana meditation, then a nimitta won't appear. But sometimes the borderline between insight and samadhi meditation, it's not so sharp. So somebody can start off by doing Vipassana, contemplating, say, arising and falling of things, and then slip into, because the mind has now become very concentrated, so they might then slip into a sustained attention to one object, no longer observing the arising and falling. And so in that case, a nimitta can appear, and they might think it's a nimitta that arises from Vipassana, but it's actually because the practitioner has slid from Vipassana contemplation into a samatha contemplation. Okay, then is there a way to test or to determine whether the nimitta is genuine or not? I would say that the way to determine, I don't know whether there's a surefire way, but by examining one's own mind, one could see or one could try to see whether the jhana factors are really there, whether the mind is solidly focused upon the object, whether there is joy and tranquility in the mind, and whether there's that sustained attention on the object, and the joy, tranquility, and the other factors of the jhana, or preliminary to the jhana. Like if the mind is a bit agitated, disturbed, or overexcited, but some kind of unusual visible form has appeared, then that's probably not a genuine nimitta.
Okay, thank you.
And Doug?
Thank you, Bhante. I have a question about the deeply rooted defilements we went through today, the asavas and the latent tendencies and similar. So those are only uprooted in a stage of supramundane consciousness.
Yeah.
So
I should underline there the word uprooted, that they're only uprooted or eradicated by the supramundane consciousness, but they can be sort of temporarily overcome in other ways. But please go on.
So my question concerns, a patujana who has to deal with these and trying to understand how to conceptualize these in relationship to a stream of consciousness. Because when I heard about these in the suttas, I sort of have an image in my mind of these things that are almost always present, kind of lurking in the shadows, as if I have mice in my house. I don't always see them, but they come out at various points. But in the Abhidhamma system, it seems more like we're talking about this stream of consciousness continually shifting. How should I conceive of these defilements that, they're not always present, correct?
Yeah, they're not always present, because when there is a wholesome state of consciousness, then the defilements are not present in those states of consciousness. But we should say that the tendencies towards them, until they're eradicated, the potential for them to arise is still there. And so they exist, I would say, just in the form of potentialities. Though I would say that in the Theravada Abhidhamma, maybe the theoretical understanding of the state, this seems to be a little bit problematic, the theoretical status of defilements when they're not active is not fully worked out, because in a wholesome citta, the defilements are not present. When you look at the factorial analysis of a wholesome citta, there are always just wholesome mental factors there. So where are the defilements on that occasion if the mind is just a series of cittas, one after another? So all one could say from that perspective is that they have things that have the potential to arise when there's some stimulus for them.
Thank you.
Then maybe some of the later Buddhist schools like Yogacara with the idea of the alaya vijnana, the storehouse consciousness, then has the idea of the seeds of the defilements always present all the time in this eighth consciousness, the storehouse consciousness. So that idea of the store consciousness maybe was brought in as a theoretical way to explain how the defilements can persist in the stream of consciousness when they are not present in active states of consciousness.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we have time for two more questions. 1, 2, 3. I have to get out of here today. Okay, you had your hand first. We'll see how we go time-wise.
Just one question for you compare the arhat with Buddha. Buddha's big rock and the arhat like small stone. So basically beyond arhat there's still a long way to go to become Buddha. So what does the arhat do? And we know the Buddha is whole purpose is trying to save living beings. How about the arhat? And how do they develop the wisdom to become a Buddha?
Okay.
And can they actually, after achieve, arhat, back to the samsara again?
Like, say the last part.
After they achieve the arhat,
okay,
can they back to the samsara again?
Can they go back to samsara? Yes. Okay, this was maybe like the topic that led to at least one of the factors that led to the division between the early forms of Buddhism and the emergence of Mahayana Buddhism. I actually gave a whole lecture on this topic, which it should be on the Baus website, Kaidi. It was a lecture that I gave, I think, in 2014. It's a pretty big topic. Okay, so according to the tradition, and that there are different traditions have different sort of theoretical ways of understanding this, but within the Theravada tradition, okay, to become a Buddha, one has to develop the perfections or paramitas over, they say, 4 incalculable periods, which is extraordinary long time, plus 100,000 great aeons. So one develops the paramis or paramitas to this extraordinary extent, then one has the ability to become a benefactor of the entire world, to gain the fullest, most complete enlightenment, and to bring the Dhamma into the world, at a time when it's lost. And then those who follow the Buddha's teaching and gain liberation through the Buddha's teaching, they become the arhats. Now the arhats also, according to the Theravada tradition, to achieve arhatship, one also has to develop the paramis or paramitas. So it's not like in the common depiction that the arhats have no concern at all with the world, just selfishly seeking their own liberation. But over many, many lives, those who become arhats have practiced the paramitas, not to the same extent as the Buddha, but to a sufficient extent to gain liberation. And those who become like the great disciples, like Sariputta, Moggallana, it's said that they have practiced the paramitas for 100,000 kalpas, 100,000 aeons. And so the difference between the Buddha and the arhats is the difference in the length of time during which they've developed the paramitas and then on account of that, the extent to which they can benefit the world. So the one who can confer the greatest benefit is the Buddha, because he's fulfilled the paramitas to the utmost extent and therefore achieves the full, unsurpassed enlightenment. Arhats who follow the Buddha's teaching or who gain enlightenment through the Buddha's teaching can transmit the teaching, can teach and guide others, but not to the same extent as the Buddha. Then the question whether arhats can come back in order to perfect the way to Buddhahood. Okay, even the Mahayana is divided about, according to the Theravada tradition, that's not possible. The Mahayana, there are two strains or two streams of thought. One is called the three vehicles as final, which means that those who achieve, that one achieves final liberation either as a Buddha, what's called a Pratyeka Buddha, a solitary enlightened one, or as an arhat disciple. And once one achieves liberation, that is it. Each vehicle is sufficient, complete in itself, a sufficient way to enlightenment and liberation. The other stream in Mahayana thought is called the one vehicle theory, or the one vehicle doctrine. According to this doctrine, there is one ultimate vehicle of the spiritual path, and that is the vehicle that leads to the full enlightenment of Buddhahood. And so those who want to take the most direct route will form the initial vow to follow the Buddha vehicle or the Bodhisattva vehicle, taking it to Buddhahood. But others will pursue the way to arhatship, and then once they reach arhatship, then the Buddha will encourage them to formulate or form the Bodhisattva vow, and then enter from arhatship to enter the one vehicle, and then to continue to practice the paramitas until they reach Buddhahood. So these are the different positions, different theories. I'm not, the authority to say which is correct or which isn't. Yeah, I want a simple one.
Using this meditation and concentration, Bhante, we can hopefully attain enlightenment. But does that mean that we don't need the sila part of it?
Oh, no.
That's what I thought.
I've always said
exactly.
The sila part is the foundation both for samatha and vipassana.
Yeah.
May all the questions be as simple as yours, my aspiration. Okay, one more from Jane, and then we'll have... Excuse me? What he asked? He asked whether sila is essential both for samadhi meditation and for insight meditation. Sila, virtuous conduct. Yeah, so of course without sila one can't progress in either samatha or vipassana.
Bhante, what is it about the path of the once returner that none of the defilements are eliminated during that path?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I don't know the answer.
Okay, thank you.
It's just that, the text says that through the weakening of greed, hatred, and delusion, one becomes a once returner who returns once more to this world and then makes an end of suffering.
Thank you.
But I could only speculate that, the stream enterer cuts off 3 fetters. Okay, then beyond that is the fetter of sensual desire and ill will. So if the once returner cut off sensual desire and ill will, he wouldn't be a once returner, he would be a non-returner. And so, I guess there has to be some stage of the path which reduces the number of rebirths to one or two, and without sending one into the level of a non-returner. And
I thought maybe it was something practical like that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we have to end now. And so we'll end, wait. We have to end. Jishu, did you want to give like what they call the vote of thanks? The people who have been helping during the retreat? And then we have to do the final sharing of the merits.
Okay, Bante, sorry. Jason want me to remind everyone about your class, Saturday class. Okay, Jason want me to kind of introduce your Saturday class.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Hi everyone, just want to let you know on Saturdays, Bante usually held class on Saturdays. And you can, if you can personally be here, that you can go to Ustream.
With all of the devas, that's the guardian deities who protect the Dhamma, the bhutas, the fierce spirits who protect the Dhamma, and the nagas, the dragon spirits who ensure that we have favorable climate, and with all beings, and you could think especially of departed relatives and friends. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu sasanang. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu desanang. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu mang parang. Etavata cham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe devanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Etavata cham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe bhutanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Etavata cham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe satanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Bhavagopadaya vichihetato etantare satakayupapana rupya rupicha asanya sanino dukkha pamuchantu pusantu nibuting. Okay, then we stand up and then we do 3 half bows. With the refuge formula, but because I'm doing this early, they're in the office, but I'm going to recite each phrase. It's very simple, so you just repeat after me. The refuges will do in Pali and the precepts in English. Okay, so first, since this is a very important step in your life, you consider as though you're in the presence of the Buddha himself. You can sort of visualize with your mind's eye the Buddha, and then maybe with his hands in the teaching position, the teaching mudra, so that would represent the Dhamma, and then the Buddha would be on both side, on either side, accompanied by Sariputta and Moggallana, representing the Sangha. And so we begin with the homage to the Buddha. So, Namo Tassa. Okay, then you could repeat. I'll pause after each phrase, then you repeat. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Okay, now for the three refuges. I'll do both Pali and English. Buddhaṃ saranang gacchami. I go for refuge to the Buddha. Dhammang saranang gacchami. I go for refuge to the Dhamma. Sanghang saranang gacchami. I go for refuge to the Sangha. Okay, now we do it a second time. The formula is the same, except there's just one word in front of it, which is dudiyampi, which means a second time. So, dudiyampi, Buddhaṃ saranang gacchami. A second time, I go for refuge to the Buddha. Dudiyampi Dhammang saranang gacchami. A second time, I go for refuge to the Dhamma. Dudiyampi Sanghang saranang gacchami. A second time, I go for refuge to the Sangha. Now we do it a third time, and the third time begins with tatiyampi. So I start each phrase with the word tatiyampi. So tatiyampi Buddhaṃ saranang gacchami. A third time I go for refuge to the Buddha. Tadiyampi Dhammang saranang gacchami. The third time I go for refuge to the Dhamma. Tadiyampi Sanghang saranang gacchami. The third time I go for refuge to the Sangha. Okay, now I say sarana gamanang sampunang, which means the going for refuge is complete. And then you just say ama bhante, which means yes bhante. Okay, so I say sarana gamanang sampunang, and you say ama bhante. Okay, now we'll do the 5 precepts. We do them in English. And I break each one into 2 phrases. I undertake the training rule to abstain from taking life. I undertake the training rule to abstain from stealing. I undertake the training rule to abstain from sexual misconduct. I undertake the training rule to abstain from false speech. I undertake the training rule to abstain from wines and liquors and other intoxicants. Okay, then I say in Pali, Ti saranena saha panchasila dhammang sadhukang surakitang katva apamadena sampadeta, which means having undertaken the 3 refuges together with the 5 precepts, observe them diligently. Then you just say, Amma Bhante. Okay, so now we've completed the 3 refuges and the 5 precepts. So now you've planted in your minds the seed of first, the seed of going for refuge, which is the seed of saddha or faith, which gradually sends down roots and branches and then grows into the flowers and fruits of the Buddha's spiritual life. And then you've taken or planted in your mind by taking the 5 precepts, the seeds of sila, of virtuous behavior according to the precepts. And it's a good practice now to maintain the sense of refuge and the precepts, to recite them every day. At least find one period during the day, convenient time, either in the morning, evening, where you have like a little shrine or altar set up, and then you can recite the 3 refuges and the 5 precepts. You can do it in English or in Pali.